Welcome again to Economics per se. With this video, I will be concluding Chapter 2 with discussions on trade, gains from trade, comparative advantage, absolute advantage, and transactions. We already know what trade is and what gains from trade are from Chapter 1. In this video, I will be illustrating an economic model that is very useful in explaining gains from trade. So the topic in hand now is trade based on comparative advantage. The fact that there are gains from trades is one of the most important insights in economics, and it makes sense because it is better to produce the goods and services you are good at producing and to buy the goods and services you're not good at producing from someone else, even if you are capable of producing everything by yourself. Suppose you are a brilliant physicist who also knows almost every this and that about repairing a car. Even if you know how to repair a car, will you not call a mechanic to fix a car if it breaks down? You will, right? This is because that mechanic is a specialist, and you would probably have more faith on her when it comes to fixing a car. So the same goes for gains from trade, principle of economics. Now, let's consider our example from the previous video. In that example, we had the Canadian economy, which is shown here, where we had it producing 120 tons of corn when it produces no wine. It's 0 here. And it produces 40,000 bottles of wine, 40,000 bottles of wine if it given it's producing no corn. And it faces an opportunity cost of 1/3 if it produces 1 more ton of corn, and an opportunity cost of 3 if it produces 1,000 more bottles of wine. Now let's assume that there is this French economy where it also produces these same two goods. From this graph, we can see that it produces 50,000 tons of corn given it's producing 0 wine, and 60,000 bottles of wine given it is producing 0 corn. And in this case, the French economy will be facing an opportunity cost of 6/5 if it produces 1 more ton of corn, and an opportunity cost of 5/6 if it produces 1,000 more bottles of wine. Both of the economies, the Canadian and the French, can do one thing. They could each choose to produce their own corns and wine and consume what each produce within its own country. Let's say the efficient production point for Canada is here. This is Canadian efficient production point, and this is the French efficient production point. In Canada's efficient production point, it is producing and consuming 90 units of corn and 10 units of wine each year. And for France, they are producing and consuming 25 units of corn and 30 units of wine each year. For simplicity, from now on, I will be mentioning units instead of saying tons of corns or thousands of bottles of wines. Now, think about it. Is this the best these two countries can do? No, it is not. Given that these two countries have different opportunity costs, as mentioned earlier, of producing each good, both Canada and France can come to an agreement that makes both of them better off. Now, from this table, we can see that the opportunity cost of producing 1 more unit of corn is more for France than it is for Canada. So it can be said that producing corns is comparatively cheaper in Canada or for Canada. And the opportunity cost of producing one more unit of wine is more for Canada than it is for France. So it can be said again that producing wine is comparatively cheaper for France. In these cases, it can be said that Canada has a comparative advantage in corn production and France has a comparative advantage in wine production. A country is said to have a comparative advantage in producing a good or a service if its opportunity cost of producing that good or service is lower than that of the other countries. The same goes for individuals as well. An individual is said to have a comparative advantage in producing a good or a service if its opportunity cost of producing that good or service is lower than that of the other individuals. Considering the results from this analysis, it would be better for both the countries if Canada specializes and only produces corns as it has a lower opportunity cost of doing so, and if France specializes and only produces wine as it has a lower opportunity cost of doing so. The following illustration will help us understand why is that. From this table, we can see that if the two countries do not trade, then collectively they produce and consume 90 plus 25, 115 units of corn, and 10 plus 30, 40 units of wine. But when they are opening for trade, as mentioned earlier, Canada is specializing and producing 120 units of corn, 120 because that is the maximum it can produce if it does not produce any wine, as we have seen from the graph earlier. And for France, it is now specializing and producing 60 units of wine. Again, it is 60 because that is the maximum it can produce if it does not produce any corn, as we have also seen from the graph before. As you can see, the entire world where Canada and France are the only countries, the total quantity of corn produced is 120 and the quantity of wine produced is 60 after the trading date and specializing took place. Before this trade, when both countries were self-sufficient, the collective quantity produced were 115 and 40 units for corn and wine respectively. They collectively produced 5 units of corn and 20 units of wine more after they started to specialize and producing at the specializing amounts. Let's say these countries reach to such an agreement where they will be equally dividing the extra quantity of each good that is getting produced after the specialization took place. Thus, Canada will end up with 92.5 units of corn and 20 units of wine, where France ends up with 27.5 units of corn and 40 units of wine. As you can see, they have gains from trade. Here, these are the gains from trade. Before, they used to consume 90 units of corn. Now they're consuming 2.5 units more of corn and 10 units more of wine. The same thing goes for France as well. They used to consume 25 units of corn before the trading took place, and after trading they are consuming 2.5 units more of corns, and the same goes for wine as well. 10 units gained from 10 units as gains from trade. One point to remember is that both countries would be willing to trade if the price each of them is paying to obtain each good is less than the opportunity cost of them producing the good domestically. In our example, the price Canada is paying for 20 units of wine is therefore going 27 27.5 units of corn to obtain this 20 units of wine from France, and the opportunity cost of producing wine domestically is 3. So as the price that Canada is paying for 20 units of wine is less than the opportunity cost of producing that domestically, it is fine with the trade agreement. The same goes for France as well. The price France is paying for 27.5 units of corn is 20 divided by 27.5. Again, this is because they are having to give up 20 units of wine to obtain 27.5 units of corn from Canada. And again, as the price France is paying for 27.5 units of corn is less than the opportunity cost of producing it locally, which is 6/5, they are also fine with the trade agreement. There is another concept that we have to take into consideration while analyzing trade between two countries, and that concept is absolute advantage. A country is said to have an absolute advantage in producing a good or a service if the country can produce more output per worker of that good or service than the other countries. Again, the same would go for an individual. Suppose in our case, Canada is better than France in producing both corn and wine. In that case, Canada will be said to have an absolute advantage. That is, a Canadian worker is producing more of both corn and wine than a French worker, let's say in a given year. Then you might think that Canada has nothing to gain from its trades with France, but that is not going to be the case. This is because despite its absolute disadvantage, France still has a comparative advantage in producing wine. And it means that even if France has to exhaust more resources than Canada does, France still has a lower opportunity cost of producing wine than Canada. Where on the other hand, even if Canada can use its resources more efficiently, it still has a comparative disadvantage in producing wine, which basically means that trading for wine is still cheaper for Canada than it surely can have Canada, and it surely can have gains from trade. The two model economies that we have studied so far are oversimplified. There are only two products that the countries produce, and they engage in a barter transaction. A trade takes the form of barter when individuals or firms directly exchange goods or services that they have for the goods or services they want to have without using any money. But as we know, in the real world, that is not the case. In the real world, individuals and firms sell goods and services and buy other goods and services. In the real world, the Canadian economy has millions of workers working for thousands of different firms which are producing hundreds of thousands of goods and services. Yet we can learn some of the crucial things about the economy by considering a simple diagram. The diagram is called circular flow diagram. These diagrams represent the transactions in an economy by flows around the circle. The diagram has two kinds of flows. One, for us, which is in blue, is for things like goods, services, labor, and capital. And this goes in one direction. And there is this flow, which for our case is in green. This flow is for money, and this goes in the opposite direction. In this circular flow diagram, there are households that are consisted of individuals or a group of individuals, let's say families for example. And then there are firms, which are organizations that produce goods and services to sell and for which they employ the households. There are two kinds of markets that operate to enable the transactions between firms and households. One of those is the factor markets, from where the firms buy or rent the resources they need to produce goods and services from the households. One of the best known factor markets is the labor market. Through the factor markets, the households sell their resources and the firms buy or rent those resources. I said the firms buy or rent the resources from the households because we assume that households own, sell and rent all of the resources, which include labor and capital. We will learn in detail in the later chapters why we have made that assumption. So the households are selling their labor and capital through the factor markets to the firm, and in return the firms have to pay them money. So now the question is, then what do the firms do with the goods and services they produce using the factors from the factor market? They sell those, and that is when the other type of markets for goods and services, come in handy. Here are the firms who sell the goods and services they produce back to the households, and the households buy those goods and services using the money they earn from the factor market. And this is how the diagram completes its circle. Although it might look like that we have figured out how the economies work, this diagram overlooks some of the huge real-world complications. A few of those are, first, in the real world, the distinction between households and firms is not always clear. Think about a small family-owned barbershop where all the employees are probably volunteering family members. So is it a firm or a household? Second, many of the sales that a lot of the firms make are not to the households. For example, the X-ray machines are not intended to sell to the households. Those are meant to sold to the hospitals, in other words, firms or institutions. Finally, the diagram does not show government. In the real world, the government takes up a lot of money that goes around the market as taxes and gives those money back in the form of free healthcare and education subsidies or scholarships. So far, we have learned about economic models and how vital these are to analyze an economy. We also have to know that there are two branches of economic analysis. One of those is positive economics. And positive economics describes the way the economy actually works. This branch occupies most of the time and effort of the economists through economic researches. The other branch of economic analysis is normative economics that makes prescriptions about the way an economy should work. This is what the policymakers use to recommend a policy. We will learn more about this in the later videos. So that is all for today. If you like the video, please share and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you the next time.